So let's bring Tim Legler, ESPN, into the conversation. And besides Milwaukee, Legs, who is the team to watch out for in the East, in your opinion?
I would say right now, Toronto. If I had to pick the team that's the biggest threat to the Bucks, it would be the Raptors. I think Boston, Indiana, Miami, Philly, and to a certain extent Toronto. I do think they're probably all capable of beating each other, or at least taking each other to a 7-game series. But I think the consistency that they play with, and the way that they play, the chemistry they have, and also the fact that they did it a year ago, and even though Kawhi's not there, the confidence level that group has, that they can get through a tough situation the way they did a year ago. They have a swagger about them that exists because they're champions. So I would bet on the Raptors probably if I had to pick one of those 5 teams to end up in the conference finals.
All right, so the Sixers, we know their home success. They just beat the Clippers at home, which they were going through some stuff, the Embiid stuff, and they don't play well on the road. They had the little hiccups on the road, Miami, Boston, and Atlanta before that. But did the Clippers win tell us anything like, all right, when push comes to shove, they can win when the pressure's on, or there's still too many questions surrounding them?
I think what that game told me more than anything was that if you watch that game for 48 minutes, that was a blueprint for me for how the Sixers should play every night. And the problem is they don't. They're inconsistent with certain things. So the first thing in that game stood out to me, obviously, Embiid was much more committed to being a post player and being a dominant paint force. He took a couple of threes. He spent some time on the perimeter. Wasn't like the Bucks game when he spent the entire second half behind the three-point line. It wasn't like some nights when you watch him and you're screaming at the TV, like, go inside. That game against the Clippers, he spent the majority of the game in the paint, where he was either post player, mid-range, like elbow type guy. He was accepting double teams. He was being physical. And they also obviously are going to get that from Ben Simmons, who's going to be a guy that when he's aggressive, he's creating a lot of opportunities in the paint. Horford was posting up. So for me, their personnel dictates they should beat you up inside. That's how they need to play. But to do that, Embiid has to commit to do it, and he has to want to do it, and he has to not have nights where he's lazy. And there are nights I watch him, and I think that's the only word you can use, because I think one of the reasons he spends so much time on the perimeter is because it's a much shorter run back on defense. Like, it takes a lot of work to run to the block. That's a long run from defense to offense. Go to the block. That's, it's 94 feet. Get down there, post up, get hit a lot, accept double teams a lot, which means you got to give it up a lot. Go to the offensive glass, and then sprint back to the other end to be a rim protector. It takes a lot of work to play that way. And I think there are some nights I watch him, and I don't think he's willing to do the work. Now, in the Clippers game, he was. Simmons was very, very good in that game. Probably was the best player on the floor, downhill. So the paint production and the commitment to it, that's the first thing on the list. They took 27 threes in that game. That's a great number for them because most of them were inside out. So guys were on balance. You explored inside first, whether it was penetration or a post-up, then the kick-out came because they're not a great three-point shooting team. With the nights they take 35, 38 threes, to me, they're killing themselves. 25, 27, great number because most of them are going to be probably on balance and good looks. That's what they did in that game. They didn't even shoot great from the three-point line, but they took good quality shots in that game. And then the last component for me is just the hounding of guys defensively. I thought Ben Simmons was incredible in that game guarding Kawhi Leonard. Thibault guarding Paul George. They frustrated those guys. Kawhi had a great stat line, but he worked his tail off for everything he got because of how much length they threw at him, how much effort they threw at him. So for me, that's a blueprint. I watched them that night, and I say if they played that way every night with that same strategy and style, I could see them getting to the finals. The problem is they just don't do it, and it starts with Embiid. He's not willing to do it night in, night out, and they don't make him.
Legs, how much of the Horford move to the bench do you credit from the play that you saw that night?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think they took a look at. There's been a lot of talk. Obviously, Al wasn't playing well. He knows it. People know it. And, the team's evaluating that when they're watching film. And I just think they just need to make a change because the spacing wasn't good. Like, you got Horford, you got Embiid, you got Simmons out there. 3 guys, the most comfortable inside the foul line. that's a problem for team spacing, especially when the other two guys. Tobias Harris is a good three-point shooter. He's not like top shelf in this league, and Josh Richardson's streaky. So when you have that kind of spacing, even though it's talent, a lot of talent, that is a problem. And I think they looked at it and said, we need to change this up. And they put Horford on the bench, and I thought it did free some things up. And Al Horford, to his credit, it seemed like he handled it pretty professionally. And if they can get him to accept that, and he's still going to play, starters minutes some nights, because Embiid can't go more than 5 or 6 minutes. He's got to come out of the game. So Al Horford's always going to have opportunities where he's going to be able to play his natural position, center, and he's going to play a lot of minutes. And if he can accept that, I think that is something that does create better spacing for them. And now they're in the process of figuring out, well, who's the fifth guy going to be? Is it going to be Korkmaz? Is it going to be Burks? Is it going to, Robinson? Those guys are getting like tryouts right now as we speak after the break. I think Brett Brown should take about 10 games and sort through that and find out who's going to start, who's going to be the primary guy of those three guys to get most minutes off the bench, shorten that rotation up a little bit as you get ready for the playoffs, and go from there. It's funny what happened to Korkmaz. I made a joke. He actually broke the code of shooters. He got too hot to where now he became a priority for other teams. Like you gotta fly under the radar. When you're that guy, and I live this role, you gotta be comfortable in that 12 to 15 point range. And then every now and then you throw in a 20 or something. You go back-to-back 30s, your name now becomes in caps on the whiteboard in the other locker room, and you saw what happened. He was scoreless because now it's space guarding, no help responsibility. You're getting all of that. And before he was kind of like, okay, yeah, he's having a good year. He's coming off the bench, does his thing. It's easier to do it against backups. The game plan sort of deteriorates as the game goes on, so he can come in and pick his spots better. When you start the game and you're that hot, you're going to get that kind of treatment. And that's why he was taken completely out of the game. And actually, I think the bench might be a better role for a guy like Korkmaz, where he can play against backups more, and the game plan does not hold up as the game goes on. You get in there off the bench 9-10 minutes in, they've already started to forget things. They're going to make mistakes, and you're going to get left open. At the start of the game, that's not going to happen because you've just been talked about before the game started. And that's exactly what happened to him the other night.
Yeah, Furkan has to learn how to throw a couple. Just brick a couple on purpose, man.
Dude, you gotta go white men can't jump and brick a couple up there and act like you never played basketball before sometimes.
Yep.
I mean, that's what you got to do. You got to fly under the radar, man. And like I say, every now and then you make a splash. You have one of those big nights where you hit 6 threes, you get a 20-point game. But then understand that if you do what he did, which was, 2 30-point games in that role, trust me, the discussion about the Sixers involved Korkmaz before the game. And I don't know that it had to that point, other than, listen, man, when this guy gets in, just know he's a shooter, stay home, like that kind of thing. But not the priority that he got in that game. And that's what he's going to get, I think, if he's a starter. I do believe, and I just, from living in locker rooms, I understand how game plans work. When you come off the bench and you're typically coming in when they're subbing in, the likelihood they will make mistakes in the communication and finding you, tagging you, touching you, making sure that you got somebody in your face, there's a much greater likelihood that's going to happen. And you're going to get a couple shots, when you first get in the game. And now you got a chance to have a good night. That night, you could just see. They was just absolutely face guarding him. They did not care about helping off of him, and he had a hard time getting going.
An underrated storyline from the Sixers-Clippers game legs is Richardson in the fourth quarter. Now, Simmons was the story. He had a monster night. Embiid had a monster night. We all know everything that was going on social media with Embiid leading up to that game. But you look at the fourth quarter, and Brett Brown, once again, he's done this a few times in key spots so far. He took the ball out of Ben Simmons' hands, and he handed it to Richardson, and he used that pick-and-roll game with Jay Rich and Ben Simmons, and that, in my mind, won the Sixers that game, at least closed out that win. He scored 17 of his 21 points in the fourth quarter, and once again, Simmons off the ball as a screener created a lot of problems for the Clippers. How do you anticipate that moving forward?
Yeah, it should be a big part of what they do to close games out. I've been saying this since Ben Simmons came into the league. It's difficult to operate in high-pressure situations in tight games, one-possession games, 5-6 minutes to go, when your primary ball handler is not a threat to score from the perimeter. It's just really difficult because you don't have to honor that. and it's a lot of wasted time with the ball in the hands of a guy that's not a threat. So you can defensively, you got guys in Embiid's lap. You can play their pick and roll totally differently in that situation. You got a guy like Richardson who's a threat. It just changes the way you have to try to guard that. And so Ben setting the screen or Ben being in the dunk position on the baseline in those situations, he can bring a lot to the table as a screener when you get him the ball in the middle of the floor on a dive because he's such a great passer and he's got great hands, or in a dunk spot, you can put him in a position where he's a major threat, but he's not the guy initiating the offense that doesn't put any pressure on teams. So I thought it was pretty big in that game that Josh Richardson did it. I saw him do it a ton in Miami. He hasn't had as many opportunities with this team, but going forward, it might be something they want to look at more in the fourth quarter.
Tim Legler, ESPN, with us here, and of course we're at the All-Star break where the Sixers find themselves in the 5 spot, and obviously if there's something that maybe through 50 games we haven't seen but you think is still in there, what would that be?
Be more specific with regard to like something the Sixers can do that they haven't done.
Something that like
I think there's more skin on, there's more meat on the bone as far as this team is concerned. I do think that.
Yeah.
For me, it will always revolve around the same topic. I've said this repeatedly. Joel Embiid is the only player since Shaq that you can run primarily your offense through as a low post offense and win a title. But the effort it takes, the commitment to it that it takes, the consistency to play that way that it takes isn't easy. But he's so good and so dominant and so unguardable with one player when he plays that way. And the way their personnel is built without a ton of shooting, to me, that's the way that they need to play. And it's different. It's look, the last time I can think of to kind of try to play that way, Memphis, when they had Pau Gasol and they had Zach Randolph, like they beat you up physically inside. They played to their personnel. Tony Allen was playing the 3, couldn't shoot. Tayshaun Prince was playing, he couldn't shoot. Mike Conley wasn't a great shooter, and they still won 50 games because they played to their strength and they were a tough out in the playoffs. And they didn't have the talent that this team has. So for me, if you got a roster like this, play old school basketball in terms of how you score, be more selective with your threes, but it revolves around a committed effort on the part of Joel Embiid to push through barriers from a conditioning standpoint and from a commitment standpoint. And if he doesn't do it, and they don't mandate that they do it, there is a very good chance they're going to lose in the first round.
Tim Legler, and of course, the Sixers play Brooklyn when they come back. Then they got the Bucks, so this should be interesting down the stretch. Real quick, I know you were a shooter. You know the impact of adding them. Were Burks and Robinson enough to just help out? Not that they're impact players, but enough to help out the other guys and clear some space. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like those moves. They're like understated. There were obviously much bigger moves at the trading deadline that took place. Those are understated, and I liked what the Sixers did because they needed depth as far as guys that could put the ball in the basket, and that's what they did. They added a couple guys that can flat out score. Now, it remains to be seen how comfortable they get, playing with this personnel and what opportunity they're going to get. But there's no doubt that it's an upgrade from what they had that they were putting on the floor. These guys can score. And now it's going to be a matter of, like I said, coming out of the break, it's a sprint to the finish. What do you got, 24, 25 games left, whatever it may be for the Sixers. They've got to sprint to the finish. They're going to take about 10 games and find out who can get comfortable between those two guys. And they are going to help them. And they're actually going to really help them, I think, in a postseason when you lock into the Sixers, whoever they play, and your focus is so much on Embiid and walling up against Simmons in transition and how you're going to play Joel Embiid, that those guys are going to have an impact because they're going to have one of them or both of them. They're going to have a 6-minute stretch in an important moment in a playoff game where they're going to put the ball in the basket 3-4 times. And I don't know that they had the personnel to do that before because they're natural scorers and they're comfortable trying to score. And that's what the Sixers needed, more of that, guys with a live handle that can get their own shot. And they added a couple and I think that's going to pay dividends down the road, but it's just way too soon to see them find a rhythm yet. It's going to take 10, 15 games after the break, and then hopefully one of them at least becomes an impact player going into the playoffs.
Tim Legler, of course, the Sixers, we got him right here on 97.3 ESPN, All-Star Weekend. Do you have any All-Star Weekend memories there?
One of my best, man. Winning the three-point shootout in 96 was special for me because it probably meant more to me than a lot of guys that have entered the competition just because of my route, coming out of LaSalle mid-major, undrafted, going and playing in the CBA, playing in Europe. Everything I did prior to finally I was in Dallas and then Golden State and then finally got my big break coming to Washington and getting a ton of time and getting that role and going into that weekend, watching that competition as a kid and watching it growing up. Larry Bird's my favorite player ever. He won it 3 times in a row. To think that I had an opportunity when I got that notice that I was going to be in that competition, I had a chance to go prove I was the best shooter on the planet. I was stoked, and it meant a lot to me. It was very emotional for me because I knew the road that I had traveled. So, yeah, it was special, man. It was a very special weekend. It meant the world to me. My daughter was born that week, my oldest child, my first child. So, that happened 5-6 days before I went to San Antonio. So that was a pretty incredible week, all things told. And you're not going to see a lot of memorabilia in my house if you come into my house, but the one thing you will see is the three-point trophy.
He's Tim Legler, and he was kind enough to join us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Happy All-Star Weekend, pal.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Yeah,
Talk
man.
to you guys soon.
And we'll talk to him soon. The Sixers back next Thursday. And, of course, you can hear all the Sixers right here. You can hear All-Star Weekend right here on 97.3 ESPN.